Hey y'all, this is Victoria.Learns, and I just want to talk about how I learned Portuguese because I realized in my last video or in one of my older videos, I talked about how I learned how to speak Portuguese, or that I learned Portuguese fairly fast. And this is just my advice to anybody learning a new language. I know, and it's like my thought and feeling that you should learn the way that's best for you. But one thing that was very, very easy for me and that kind of gave me a jump start in learning languages was using Pimsleur. Portuguese, I learned in 7 lessons in Pimsleur, but I did those 7 lessons over a span of 30 days before I went to my trip to Brazil. Now, I probably forgot everything that I learned in Portuguese. I feel like if I start talking to somebody or like start practicing again, it would come right back. And it's kind of like my Spanish. If I'm not practicing it daily, using it, listening to it, then it like kind of goes away. But the minute I start talking to people and getting back in the flow of it, it comes back. I'm in no way an advanced Spanish speaker learner, but I really feel that Pimsleur gave me a jump start. And I also started learning Swedish on Pimsleur, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about that later. But what happened was I was getting ready to go on a trip to Brazil to visit my cousin and some friends. And what I wanted to do when I got there was speak in Portuguese. And I figured that I would use Pimsleur. I had a cousin that used Pimsleur. She learned how to speak Haitian Creole on there. She learned how to have like really good interactions with people, translating and stuff like that. So I figured, I'll use Pimsleur to learn a little bit of Portuguese before I go, or anytime I go to a country and it's a different language, I'll just use Pimsleur to learn. I tried Pimsleur for Chinese, but I could not get the pronunciation. That's a different topic for a different day because, Chinese has like the different accents and, what do you call it? They have the tones, and the tones were very hard for me because there's like a lesson at the end where you have to repeat certain words or say certain words in this little pronunciation practice, and I kept on failing it, and that was like discouraging to me, so I just stopped the Chinese. But I'm gonna talk about Portuguese today. So I did Portuguese on there. I started speaking Portuguese very fast. I will preface this with, I speak Spanish. I'm in no way an expert Spanish speaker, but because I'm very familiar with Spanish, Portuguese sounds similar. Some of the words are very similar. So when I'm speaking and pronouncing certain things, it just became a little bit natural. And even to hear the language, it became a little bit more natural. So I was going to Brazil in 30 days. I picked up Pimsleur. I only got through 7 lessons, and there are multiple lessons on there. I only really got through 7 lessons, but I practiced those 7 lessons for 30 days until my pronunciation was perfect, or until I could like automatically respond within the app, like with the questions that we're asking. And Pimsleur is basically like, it's a 30-minute session, each lesson, and they only recommend that you do 1 lesson for a day, but I would literally do like 1 lesson until I perfected it. You do that 1 lesson for 30 minutes throughout the day. It may be questions like, imagine you walk into a coffee shop and you see an old friend. Greet them, and it'll be like, bom dia, or bom dia, and it'll break that word down. Dia, bom. And then it'll say bom dia. So you repeat the word. They'll say the word. They'll give you a little bit of time to repeat the word. And then it'll come up later on in that lesson, as well as building up on the lessons to come. So, and it'll also give you what I like about Pimsleur. It'll give you the things that you would say to your friends. So it's like, let's say you meet your friend in a coffee shop, but it'll also say, let's say your teacher is there. So you may address your teacher differently instead of addressing your friends, because in certain languages, or like just saying like, hey Denise, or hey Mrs. Denise, or you know what I mean? Like there's a way that you would address different people depending on like the country that you're at or whatever. So it'll teach you the formal way and the informal way to greet people. So I really like that about Pimsleur too. So instead of saying bom dia, como vai, like you may say bom dia. Now it's like slipping my mind because I haven't practiced Portuguese in a long time. But you may, instead of saying like hi, hey, what's up, you may say, hey, how are you doing? I I learned also because I flew back home to go to the beach, and I realized that in my airport, which I didn't realize before, there were so many people that were speaking Portuguese, or so many people from Brazil that like go to Miami a lot. So when I was there, it just so happened that I was in an elevator with this lady, and she was lost, and they were doing like construction and stuff like that, and she was trying to find her way. So I started speaking to her in Spanish, and she's like, oh, español. And like, I'm sitting there like, oh, hold on, fala português. You know, like, and she's like, yeah, fala português. And I'm like, fala un poco. Like, I speak a little bit, and then I tried to like speak with her, and honestly, I was just so excited to be speaking to somebody in Portuguese, and I was like, você me entende? Or você o senhor entende? And I was so excited just to be speaking to her that I'm forgetting, like, she's trying to find like her family and stuff like that. But I was really actually able to speak a pretty solid conversation with her, understanding her and she understanding me. And I think I was only in 3 lessons deep by that time, maybe 2 or 3 lessons deep. And it happened really fast, so that boosted my confidence. And the thing that I supplemented with the Pimsleur lessons was I started, before I was watching everything in Spanish, I started watching everything in Portuguese. So I would go on Netflix, and I found like there's a vast majority of TV shows, a lot of cute movies in Portuguese, and I just start watching and listening to things in Portuguese on Netflix. And that really helped me with just having an ear for the language. Sometimes I felt like I had to run stuff back and look at the subtitles in English, which I would do in Spanish too. If Spanish like is a little bit too advanced for me, if I'm listening to an accent like from Spain or something, I'll put on English subtitles, but like I'll switch it right back to the Portuguese subtitles. But I would encourage you to kind of watch something that's kind of on your level or a little bit above, where you're able to pick up most of the things that they're saying. But I picked up a lot of words. So I did that. I supplemented with things on Netflix. And then by the time I got to, I promise you, at work, I spent every single day listening to Pimsleur, practicing Pimsleur, like all day on my job. I could wear earphones and like listen to stuff. And like I would literally just sit there and listen and practice and repeat the stuff from the lessons on Pimsleur on my phone. I go to Brazil. My cousin's girlfriend, she speaks 0 English, like nothing. She doesn't understand anything English. She doesn't speak any English. And also a lot of the people there, they do not speak English for the most part, unless you're staying on the resort. I didn't stay on like a resort or like a hotel there. I stayed like in the city. We were in Rio de Janeiro. And my cousin lived there, so like I stayed in his apartment in Rio, and we just like were around the city. It's a perfect place for you to learn a language. I know there's certain places that you go and like everybody kind of speaks English, so it's hard to practice the language because the minute they don't understand you, they'll switch back to English, or you have to ask them like, can you please talk to me in Portuguese or whatever language it is. But Brazil, I think that if you go there, you'll have no problem practicing the language. I realized a little bit later in the trip, because a lot of the times we walked everywhere because everything is right there. Like we walked to the cafe every morning, we walked to the beach, and I spoke to different people, but I didn't realize how slow my cousin's girlfriend was talking to me in Portuguese until we had an Uber ride to Pedro Bonita. And that girl, oh, hold on. Okay, that girl got in that Uber. When I say everybody in that car was just blah, 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 and I'm like, oh, she's talking to me slow. I didn't realize it. Like, and I was like, oh, you have so much patience, like, to be speaking to me, taking your time speaking to me and stuff like that, because they speak really fast. But I didn't notice, like, everybody was kind of like, I don't know why I didn't notice this, but everybody was kind of like talking to me very slowly. But I was able to survive. That whole week I spoke completely in Portuguese. There was one point I went to a cafe and there was a guy that worked at the hotel, but he also spoke English. And he was talking to me and he was like, oh, like you speak in Portuguese? And I'm like, I'm trying. I was like, you know, I speak more Spanish than Portuguese. He starts talking to me in Portuguese, but he used a different accent and he spread out his words. Like when I say I understood very, very clearly every single word that that man said in Portuguese. Like I'm not saying that I didn't understand the other people, but like the way he spoke, it almost sounded like Spanish coming out of his mouth. So I understood like completely every single thing he did. And he's like, I'm speaking Portuguese, but I'm just speaking it with a little Spanish accent and I'm breaking the words up or whatever. So I think that's why I learned so quickly, because the language to me, to them, they'll say it's not, I speak Portuguese, I don't speak Spanish, but a lot of times they could speak to one another in their own language and understand one another. But he said, like, it's very similar. I can understand why you understand or whatever. So I kind of stopped only because I really wanted to improve my Spanish. And because the languages are so similar, I started mixing Portuguese and Spanish when I came back. And I was talking to one of my coworkers. I only talked to her in Spanish. When I was talking to her, I was like saying Portuguese words as Spanish words. And I'm not like one of those people who come back from a trip and like start speaking the language and, oh, can you pass me the croissant? Like, I'm not one of them girlies. It was just that like when I was speaking to her in Spanish, I was like, instead of saying where is or like onde fica, and it was just like, and I really, really got mixed up with it. I think that you could learn both, but it mixed me up so much. I was just like, whoa, let me get back to my Spanish to like really get my Spanish back on track, and then I'll get back to Portuguese. So I will say I would recommend Pimsleur. Like if you have zero knowledge, you can talk very fast using Pimsleur. It's not the end all be all, but it can give you a really big jump start to just get basic words, basic greetings. I would say the travelers, greetings, words. Do you understand this language? Do you understand English? Do you understand Swedish? You know, like the basic beginning conversation, salutations and things like that. Hi, how are you? Depending on where you're at, because different countries, they may not say hi, how are you? But whatever their greeting is, thank you, you're welcome. Where's the restaurant? Where's the restroom? How long is it going to take? Like the basic things to get into a conversation where the person knows that, well, they know something. They have some basic level of the language where a conversation can be started. And even if they don't know all the words that you're going to say, or like that the knowledge that you may or may not have, they will be willing to kind of work with you, because it's like you're not starting from like a blank, completely nothing slate. Like you have some knowledge of the language, how it sounds and things like that. So I think Pimsleur is a good start, but I also would say supplement it with other things depending on who you are as a person, because some people may not like television shows, but music or reading and things like that. But I think even if you read, like try to get something that you could read with sound so you can understand how the language sounds and you're not pronouncing the words incorrectly. The other thing I could say about Pimsleur is, and this is not like no ad for Pimsleur, but like it really helped me so much with Spanish even and Portuguese. I started learning Swedish only because I had a coworker. I thought he was just like some regular white dude, but I mean, he is, I didn't mean to say it like that, but he was from Sweden, and like everybody knows, like I love languages. I learned a lot of greetings in like a lot of different languages, like basic stuff, thank you, hi, how are you, stuff like that. But I learned he was Swedish, so I went on Pimsleur and I was like, give me 1 week. And in a week, I was able to greet him and like start very basic conversation. And the first thing that he said was, I'm so surprised that how well you're pronouncing words. And I will say about Swedish, side note, is that there are a lot of words that are like similar to English, maybe in my brain, that a lot of it is like very similar to English, even though it's like a Nordic language and English is a Germanic. There are a lot of words like that we say that may not be the exact same, but sound very similarly. But the one thing that he said was that my pronunciation was very good for somebody who literally didn't know anything 2 days ago. So that's what I got from that. But the other thing I will say is a lot of the prompts on not on Swedish, a lot of the prompts on Pimsleur are similar across different languages. So when I was learning Portuguese, the speaker on Pimsleur would say, tell him you're going to leave at 5 p.m. That's what they would say, like on the Portuguese learning side, and it would be the same voice. So when I went over to Swedish, it's the same guy saying the same thing, but in my brain, I want to say it in Portuguese instead of saying it in Swedish. And I know that this is probably not like just me. If anybody has learned more than one language on Pimsleur, please tell me this is not a individual experience that I'm having. But because his voice and the command is the same, my brain is going back to Portuguese and it wants to say it in Portuguese instead of saying it in the new language that I'm learning on there. I would suggest, Pimsleur people, if y'all out there, if it's not just me and my cousins out there watching this and my friends, if y'all could please change the speaker across different languages, because I'm listening to him across these different languages that I'm learning, and because he's commanding me and saying basically the same thing over and over again, my brain is not making the shift to say, even though the person who's speaking in the other languages saying, speaking differently and it's a different person, a different voice, because the commands are coming from somebody who is the same across the board, my brain is not making the switch. So sometimes it's hard for me to get out of like, he wants you to respond in Swedish and not Portuguese. But anyway, that's it for my little rant. If you want to learn languages, I would highly suggest learning in Portuguese. And I would highly suggest listening to somebody who probably knows way more languages than I do, because honestly, I am not perfect in any of the languages that I speak, not even English. So somebody who has